Well, this is fun. Thank you, everybody. Whoops, admit all. I forgot, I've got to admit people. Okay, there you go. You've been admitted. This is great. Welcome. Hi, Emil. How are you? Continue. Got rid of that. Okay. All right. New format. Okay, there we are. I've got multiple screens going on. That's why, because the camera's on that one. So I'm going to turn that one down a little bit because you don't need to see that. All right. Anyway, thank you all for being here today. I'm hoping you can hear me. Somebody put their hand up. Let me know you can hear me. There you go. All right, great. Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin with the PowerPoint itself. And again, this session we're going to have it's going to be a little bit different because it's a meeting and not a webinar. So I've been doing webinars, so I'm more familiar with how to connect you to audio if you decide you're going to say something. So and I'm okay with everybody speaking, so it's all right. The format also has me actually seeing you, which is the first time I've had that. Normally I would do my webinar and I wouldn't be able to see anybody else. So so that being said, hi, how are you? We are at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. And again, my name is Kevin Burke, and there's my telephone number. Please, I want to hear from you. If there's something I can help you with, please let me know. And there's my email address. Email is frequently better, but this this is the way it works. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can always send me an email and let's set up a time or do something like that. Okay, so thank you all for that. And then my next little slide just talks about some of my credentials, some of the little things I've done over the years. I always tell everybody not to try this at home. It's just one of those things that, and by the way, I had no idea, 44 years ago, because I started in real estate in 1979, but 44 years ago, I had no idea I'd be here today. I mean, it wasn't even a concept. So anyway, I just want to let you know on the left-hand side, I continue to teach attorneys real property law. So it's MCLE approved class, continuing education for attorneys. And then underneath that were the classes I used to teach. Pretty much I decided at a certain point after 15 years of doing that in multiple colleges that I really wanted to work with people that were in real estate rather than people that were thinking about getting into real estate. And that's kind of where we ended up where we did. My screen says I want everybody to make sure everybody's aware it is being recorded. I don't know about what that recording is going to look like, but I'm sure they will let me know at some point. Next screen is going to be the stuff I'm doing today. So NAR, I was the chair of risk management issues for the National Association of Realtors West last year. I will be chair this year of legal affairs for the California Association of Realtors. And last year I was chair of realtor risk management, consumer protection. Anyway, all that stuff is all stuff, I always say to people, that's stuff you've done in the past. What are you doing today? Okay. All right. So we're going to be talking about things that are going to appear to be legal. I am not a practicing attorney. I do a lot of trial work, but mostly as hired as an expert witness. Standard of care of real estate agents. Did they do what they were supposed to be doing? Things like that. The agent's duties of inspection and disclosure, and then market conditions in San Diego County. So those are my specialties. Conversation today not intended to be a substitute for the advice of your broker, nor for that of your attorney. Please consult with them as appropriate. Okay, so our talk today is intended to be interactive. Please ask questions or offer input by utilizing the Q&A button. So again, if we had more people here, I would kick in the volume. If you want to say something, raise your hand. I'll go ahead and turn the mic on so you can speak. But normally we have so many people on the call that we have to use the Q&A button. So just be aware that if you unmute at some point, the program has a bad habit of unmuting you later. So just be aware of that. We'll try to pay attention to it. So I do look forward to hearing from you because it does help me, especially with the topic matter of today. I've been on probably thousands of listing appointments. And I just have a formula for how I'm going to do that. And hopefully that'll help you with what you're doing. So today, how to create the winning listing presentation. And then this afternoon, I will be doing CAR's new and revised forms. And then to Thursday, I will be creating the ultimate listing agreement. That's just the form itself. Hi, Debbie, welcome. And then in the afternoon, I will be doing leases and creating amazing lease templates. And again, that will be on Thursday. And that will round out my year, actually. That'll be the end of my year with SDAR. I've been teaching classes here for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And so we'll see what 2024 brings. Member benefits, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And so thanks for joining us for our discussion of how to create a winning listing presentation. And so I'm going to go along pretty quickly. If you don't interrupt me, I get faster. So, please stop me and ask questions as we go along. Your strategy is to get 100% of the listings that you want to get. Most people think they need to get every listing. My experience has been there were some listings that I really should not have taken. And it's usually a cue when I go on a listing appointment and I'm already doing battle with the owner of the property about things, not just a lively conversation, but I have had listing appointments that I've gone on where the owner was white knuckled on the kitchen countertop, and so it can be pretty interesting. I'm a little bit of a treat when it goes to being on a listing appointment. But we'll talk about that. So yes, there will be some that you don't want. And like I said, I've had my share of those that I wish I hadn't taken. So the more listing appointments that you go on, the greater your chances of success, obviously. Why? Because you're getting experience, you're building that as you go. The more confident you will become, the calmer you will become. And I think that's kind of the secret, is not getting worked up, but rather going there. And we'll talk about my demeanor when I'm going on a listing appointment. We'll talk about that in a minute and why I get as many listings as I get. I mean, and admittedly, at this point in my career, it's not likely that I'm not going to get the listing. As I said earlier, it's more likely that I may not want the listing, but you have to be a judge of that. You have to decide whether or not you're just going to be, doing battle with the owner the whole time, or whether or not you're going to actually be successful in selling the property. So it's definitely a numbers game. I admit that I have an attitude problem. Early in my career, I went on listing appointments thinking, oh my goodness, I hope I get this listing. Now, when I go on a listing appointment, I think, do I want this listing? And so that's a whole completely different shift in attitude. Oh my God, I hope I get the listing. That's just going to create your own anxiety, create other problems for you when you're going on a listing appointment, and owners can sense that. And so, I've gone on listing appointments where I've said to the owner, how did the last two appointments go? And they'll look at me like, how did you know we had two appointments? Oh, well, because most people try to interview three. And so, I always like it when I'm the last one. And so they're kind of surprised that I'm aware of that, but that just comes from experience and doing these listings. So, yep, it's an attitude problem. So it's quite a difference in ideologies. Let's discuss some important points about positioning yourself for your success. So will you be sending a pre-listing packet? And me personally, I'm going to tell you, I'm not a big fan of that. And part of the reason behind that, and I'll show you, is that I'm concerned about timing. So remember that NAR's Code of Ethics, and frankly, the Department of Real Estate, and then the legal system says that if you send something to someone prior to their listing expiring or not being being available anymore, then you might be interfering with contract, and that's a tort. That's against the law. But likewise, it's a code of ethics violation. So I've known of agents who have counted the days. Got listed on the the 13th. So I just go 3 months out, and then I'm going to assume that listing goes away. I'm going to tell you not to do that. I think that's dangerous. But I do know people that make a lot of money calling on expired listings. Again, if you're going to do something like that, I would recommend that you be checking that federal do not call registry for those telephone numbers. Okay, so and you could be soliciting the listing of another agent. So my question usually when I'm calling on an expired, I would say something along the lines of, if you have you relisted your home? Because that's going to be the first signal that the listing is not available. In which case, thank you, same listing agent. Let me know. I'll be happy to go through them for everything. You don't want to be held to be interfering with that listing agreement. And sometimes they do relist. And strangely enough, I found in my experience most of them really don't. And part of that is because I think the agent that had the listing for 3 months or 6 months or whatever period of time, the agent that had the listing, really didn't communicate with the seller. And then when the listing went to expire, they just didn't do anything because they figured the seller was mad at them because they hadn't talked with them for the whole period of time. That's kind of a weird way to do your business, but I would say that don't assume anything. Make the call. If you're calling to solicit the listing, make sure that they're not on the do not call registry. And even still, I'd always start off because you don't know if they've actually started a listing with someone else that's just not in the multiple listing service yet. Okay. And be aware, and I'm going to be doing some podcasts on the new laws that are coming out, but there's a new law that takes effect on the 1st of January that says you may not have a listing you may not take a listing for more than 2 years. So be aware of that 2 years limit on the listings. So, and I know that the Department of Real Estate is looking at people that are doing leases and then creating the listing agreement at the time of the beginning of the lease, so that at the end of the lease period, then that's when they start marketing the property. The DRE doesn't like that either because they feel like it's conscripting the seller into working with you just because you help them with the lease agreement. All right, so remember that I want to make sure that all the decision makers will be at the appointment. Okay, and so I always make that, when I'm pulling up the grant deed, and I should say that because Linda this morning pulled up a grant deed on a property. Linda's our broker, pulled up a grant deed on a property, and here we thought we had 2 people on title, and it turns out there's a 3rd person on title with 2 of them had exactly the same name. The only difference was that the initials were different. Remember, when you go to put the listing into the multiple listing service, you are telling the realtor body that you have all of the necessary signatures. That's an MLS rule. So you have all of the necessary signatures. So remember that if we had missed that 3rd person and we put it in the multiple listing service, and then you bring in an offer, we're probably going to owe you a commission because you relied on the fact and well, and I'm frozen on one screen, but and Debbie, I lost you. Debbie, come back. Where are you? Kind of like me, I'm unstable, but ensure that all the decision makers are at that appointment. Okay. And as I was saying earlier, sometimes I've, like in the situation we have right now, I've got a third party on the listing, and nobody was aware of it. Even the agent that asked us to create the listing agreement wasn't aware of that fact. So do make sure that you've got all the interested parties on that agreement. I'm trying to, why is that? Oh, I'm really bright. Okay, so wrong screen. Zoom. Okay, all right. So, and we don't know necessarily, when I say all the decision makers are at the appointment, I'm not talking about everybody that's on title. So, for example, so it may be that there's somebody who has an interest in selling the property and just had this experience where, the neighbor had contributed the down payment to the buyer who bought the property, and now they were the seller. And so that neighbor had something to say about what they were going to, be selling the property for. And so their name was, they weren't going to sign anything, but they were definitely going to be a decision maker in that game. And so otherwise, your appointment is just a friendly gossip session. So of the decision makers, you're going to need to quickly identify the key decision maker. And so that's not always easy to tell, but I can tell you that by the time that you sit, that's when you're going to be able to tell who the decision maker is. So again, it may be 5-year-old Johnny, it may be the kid. I went on an appointment. I had 16 people there. They were all co-trustees of the trust, but there was one person who had the trust cert, one person who actually would be signing on behalf of the trust. And so it was interesting because when I was on the appointment, it was in the house, and they had like bleachers, and everybody was a nurse, and they had everybody set up there, sitting down, waiting for me to start my thing. But the one person in the wheelchair in the middle, in the very front, who was face to face with me, was the one that was the actual decision maker for the entire trust. Okay, so make sure you got all the decision makers there. Again, I've had it happen. One of them is not there; they're at work or whatever. You need their signature anyway. So I usually, if I show up and I don't have everybody, I'm going to probably say, hey, let's just reschedule this for another time that's more convenient for everybody. Okay, everybody good? All right. Okay. The time you spend in that first meeting is worth more than all the time that you will spend with them later. If you can get a lot of the issues out of the way up front at the original appointment, then you will you're not going to have to deal with it later. So make sure you spend time with them. Don't just ditch. Don't just head out of there because you think you're all done with the appointment. Okay. So it is okay to have a long listing appointment. All right. You have 3 choices of venue. So one, go to the owner's house, right? And that's the one that you are not going to have available. I don't know what is going on with the internet today. So anyway, so again, Linda, if you can hear this, somebody tell me that you can hear it. Okay. All right. So that being said, it is okay to have a long listing appointment. I went on an appointment. I worked with law enforcement about 50 years ago, and I went on an appointment. A buddy of mine who worked graveyard with the sheriff's department, and I get there at 10 o'clock at night because he works graveyard, and it's his day off, or his night off, and so I ended up sitting there until about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I swore after that I would do these listing appointments on my own terms, and so that's what I did end up doing later. So anyway, it's okay to have a long appointment. Obviously, I got the listing. I walked out of there with it. Everything was good. Again, you have 3 choices of venue. Go to the owner's house. I like that approach. You can go to have them come to you, office, public place. That's okay. It may serve to help desensitize them to what you're trying to do. And then the other option is you can do everything over the internet. And so there's nothing wrong with that. You could do everything over the internet, but in fact, frankly, I do. But I can tell you that when I have people sign agreements and do things like that, I'm doing share screen with them so that I can see that they can see, and I can essentially establish that they're aware of what it is that I'm actually doing, okay, or what we're agreeing to sign, okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the in-person one at the house, because I got some really neat little maneuvers for you that I think will be really, really helpful, okay. So that being said, all the above have their pluses and minuses. Appearances. So let's talk about appearances a little bit. I think you need to dress for success. I'm always astounded at the apparel that people take, when they go on a listing appointment. It just kind of amazes me. So I would suggest that
Hey Siri, call Adrian. Hey, how are you? I'm good. So I'm watching Kevin Burke's webinar, but I have no volume, which I've never had this happen with Zoom before. And also it only shows there's 4 participants. And 2 of them are Kevin and his wife, and I'm one of them. It shows me, Kevin, SDAR as the education host, and Linda. Isn't that weird? And I can't hear anything. And I sent him a message and he hasn't responded, which he can see it because I sent it to him. So I don't know. Kevin, can you hear me? I just removed my mute. You know, it's weird. This is looking like
Can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you hear me? Aaron? On Zoom. Can you hear me on Zoom?
I can hear you on Zoom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can see you're on. So I don't even see he's on here. Hey, Kevin, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Kevin, we can't hear you. And I can't read lips. No, nothing. Uh-oh. Is that maybe why there's only 4 people got on and got off? But he could see our chats. He should be able to see our chats. Has he responded to you?
Yeah.
Kevin, can you hear me? Mm. Mm-mm. Okay, I'm gonna call Kevin. I'll call you back, okay? Okay.
Okay, we'll try that again. You know,
Oh,
that's really bizarre because it keeps muting me and unmuting me. This is again slightly different format than the webinar that we were doing. Now we're doing meetings, and so it's a different heading in the Zoom platform. I don't know if I'm going to take responsibility for it. If it wasn't working, it's probably my fault. So anyway, we had a lot of people on here, and then we had some internet problems, and so we're down to a handful. So it's all good. Okay, so questions for me so far. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and from the current slide, and again, be interested, not interesting. I actually got that from the director of education, the director of education, who's a friend of mine, and he said that don't be interesting, Kevin, just be interested in what other people are doing. So opening lines. So let's talk about some opening lines. When I go on my listing appointment, what am I doing? So this is one of the most important questions that you're going to ask the seller, okay, or that the seller. We're going to talk about what the seller's going to ask you, right? I always ask them as I'm walking in the door on my appointment, and this is the deal closer for me every time. Can you take me on a brief tour of the property? So remember what we said earlier today when I had the listing input sheet on the clipboard. I take the listing input sheet. It's kind of a presumptive close, right? I kind of just assume I'm going to get the listing if I want the listing. And so sometimes when I show up, they'll have they'll say, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to sign anything. We don't know if we decided we're going to work with you or not. Now I say that because I know that's what they tell other people. I rarely have that conversation, but again, I'm going to go in there as if I'm here to take a listing. Okay. So I'll take that clipboard. I'll have that listing input sheet that I showed you earlier. So my question to them, can you take me on a brief tour of the property? And so I tend, in my style is I tend to go left first. You're usually going around the interior of the house in a clockwise pattern. And I let them show me everything. When you get to the garage is almost always the last thing you look at. And if you think about it for a second, that's usually when you're showing property, that's about the same kind of pattern that you're going to be going through. But you need to have that listing input sheet because there's going to be a lot of questions that the sheet is going to be. It's kind of like, and Linda and I were talking about this morning. We read you your rights, even though we've got that memorized, right? But for the listing appointment, the checklist happens to be the cheat sheet, the one thing that's going to trigger your questions about, oh, is it a gas stove, or is it a gas water heater, or is it a tankless water heater? Speaking of Linda, Linda's back. So, so that being said, I like to take that listing input sheet with me because that way it reminds me of the things that I have to know. So for example, it tells me right on the sheet, I need room dimensions. So I need to do that. So I'm going to probably take the tape measure with me. I'm probably going to do those measurements as I said earlier, I hold 0, they hold the business end of the tape measure. So can you take me on a brief tour of the property? And then I always ask the question, do you mind if I take notes? So I don't want to assume that they're okay with me taking notes. I want to ask the question. I want everything that I do in that house, I want it to be permission based. I want it to be out of respect. And so do you mind if I take notes? And then what do? I take my notes right on the clipboard, right? What do these marks on the door jamb represent? Well, you know what they represent. That's the 5-year-old, the various stages of growth and things like that. But you don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But you do want to take notes of everything. And so I learned early in my career that people really liked it when I wrote things down. And so me and some of I've got a fairly photographic memory. So I would write things down and then I would leave and I would throw it out because I had it in my head already. The reason I was taking the notes was really for their benefit more than for my own benefit. And so, but today I actually take notes for a lot of reasons, and most of them legal and things like that. But when I have that clipboard in front of me, along with that listing input sheet, and again, pulling that up here, my listing input sheet, I'm relying on this. I'm going to write down the room dimensions right here at the appropriate place on page 3, at the top of page 3, because I know I have to have that, right? I have to have the room dimensions. Again, I have to have a photo, things like that. Okay, everybody good with that? Let's go back here. So write everything down, and on your listing input sheet, use your listing input sheet as a way to take notes, because when you're done, it's going to look like this great big Scrabble thing. But at the same time, it's also going to show them that you care enough to write down their opinions on things and their positions on things. Okay, so really important to do that, folks. Make sure you write everything down. Write it on your listing input sheet. Don't bring in 25 pieces of paper. Don't bring in sticky notes, things like that, because you're just going to end up confusing them and confusing you. And plus it doesn't look very good. Okay. So write everything on the listing input sheet in front of them. Make sure they see you to do it. Okay. While they are speaking and you are listening. So remember, we listen twice as much as we speak, because you want to learn from them on that appointment. You're not there necessarily to put on a show. Okay. All right. So, you wouldn't be on that appointment if they hadn't been convinced that you were worth listening to. Okay. All right. So let them lead you through the house. And so we talk about that. Leading you through the house. And that's really a lot of times for your own safety. But leading you through the house because you want them to give you a tour. When you walk into when you're showing a property, you say, oh, and this is the bathroom. And it's like, it should be pretty obvious that it's the bathroom, right? So I don't think we need to go into that. But, the owner will be telling you as they're leading you through the house what is important to them. Okay. And so what are the important things about the house? What are the features of the home that entice them to buy it in the first place? These are questions you're going to want to ask them later, is that, what was it about the house that was important to you? Because you're going to write those things down, because those are probably going to be things that are going to be important to others who are looking to purchase the home. Everybody okay? They will tell you where the signing room is. And this is a concept nobody's going to tell you in real estate, but where is the signing room? Where is the room that they expect to transact business? So, they think, you could end up in the kitchen, right? You could end up in the living room. You could end up in the dining room, but wherever you end up, and this is really, really important, wherever you end up, let them sit first. Very, very important. And so people ask me, why is that important? And one of the reasons that is important is because you're in their home. And so out of respect, you don't want to be taking their seat. So you want to avoid sitting on someone else's throne. All right. And so that throne could be, the wife sits at the head of the table. She's the decision maker in the group. And then you sit in her chair. Then the rest of this appointment is blown, because you're literally going to be sitting there and realize how uncomfortable everybody is because you're sitting in her chair. Does that make sense? Okay. So avoid sitting on someone else's throne. All right. Okay. I usually, what I do is I'm a chauvinist from way back. I hold the chairs for the ladies, that kind of thing. And then I let them decide where they're going to sit. And then whatever's left, I usually say, is it okay if I sit here? Again, everything I'm doing in the house is permission based. Everything is going to be respectful. And I want to get permission to sit. And I'm almost always going to be the last person to sit. We get nervous when we go on that appointment. We're rushing to get through it. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably not a winning strategy. But again, it is a strategy. But if you go taking the chair of the person who's your guest or your invitee, then you're probably going to find yourself in an awkward position. That's also going to tell you who's in charge, as I said earlier. Okay, I usually can tell that when I'm putting them in my car and I'm showing them property. Where people sit is usually an indication to me as to who's going to be making the decision. So I want you to remember, there's two things. The seller only cares about two things. The first thing they care about, and you need to be prepared for the discussion, okay, because it's going to happen. All right, how much are you going to get me? And how much are you going to charge me to get there? Those are the two things all the seller wants to talk about. How much you're going to get me and how much you're going to charge me to get there. So let's take a look at that. Let's do an analysis of this. So let's start off with how much are you going to get me? All right. So people, remember the old story, people buy on emotion and they sell on fact. So now we're in the house with the seller. So we're selling now on fact. Okay. So present your visuals. And so I have this great big long line of things to show you. In fact, I'll show you the screen of this stuff. And as I always say, folks, I will send all of this to you. Okay, so you can see I have everything all in here. I've got a whole bunch of research that I've done on this. If I pull up my PowerPoint again, or my this little guy again, oops, I thought I'd already opened it. Okay, hang on a second here. Let me go back to that screen. And for example, I'm going to pull up my 7 reasons to work with a realtor, right? So, these are things that are all available to you, that are available to you in the Zip Forms program. If I pull that up, and of course I'm having, there we go. So 7 reasons to work with a realtor, and these are all available to you in your Zip Forms product. So if you look at your Zip Forms product, again, if I can find, here it is, and I had started to open up my CAR website. So I go to CAR. And I'm going to show you where all these are. I think it's just a wonderful, and nobody knows that these are here. Okay, so here I'm going to go in, and I'm going to, of course, have a problem with the program. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to click on Access Now, and I'm going to go ahead and I thought I was going to go ahead and log in. Okay, let's try it. Christmas. Lots of technology issues here today. So sign in. We're just trying to sell you stuff, right? So, folks, you're probably aware of the fact that that they're working on the program right now. Why is it pulling this up? This is ridiculous. All right, I'm gonna have to bag that part of it. Sorry about that. I'm trying to pull up. Oh, that's California Rental Listing Service. Why is that? Oh, that's why. Look at that, huh? Okay, here we go. Let's try this again. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the Forms button here real quick. As soon as it opens, I feel like Alice's Restaurant. We're just waiting for the song to come around again. Okay, here we go. I'm going to click on Forms. And then that's going to pull up the library, which, by the way, they're working on right now. Okay, but in that library, let me minimize that icon so I can see it. I'm going to click on my forms, and of course today this is hysterically funny. Nothing's going to work. Hate the program. There you go. Christ's sakes. Okay, so I need forms. Okay, let's try it again. Forms. And it's just going to insist on opening this stupid thing up. So add a form. Give me my library. Oh, that's going to be a disaster. Never mind. Okay, we're not going to do that. They're in the middle of a process right now. So that's why nothing is going to work. So we'll go back over here. I did want to show you essentially, these other things that I have for you that you can pull down. They come out of the Zip Forms library. I will email all of this to you. I'm more than happy to share my work product, as it were. So, I always ask the seller, what would an appraiser say? Because again, I'm answering the question, how much are you going to get me? And so I'm not going to be able to probably get you more than the property's actually worth. If the property's only worth, $1 million, then it's also going to be worth. So, be honest with your people. That way you're not having to rethink that whole conversation later. Okay. So, that being said, what does the appraiser base their opinion on? Well, of course, they base their opinion on sold properties, right? Sold. So be realistic with the seller. Be honest with them up front. When it comes to pricing, and literally RPRs on, I've had on buyers, we do the same thing. I want to be able to have the buy, I showed the buyer, here's how much it's worth. I told you you're overpaying for the property. And so I want to be able to defend that. So have them sign off on that. Okay. So their conversation is the seller prices the property. At least that's what they think, right? But really the buyer is the one that determines the ultimate sales price. The buyer is the one that's going to bring the offer in. Buyer's going to be the one that's going to decide what it's worth. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So that being said, do your list price versus sales price narrative. So, how many listings are selling close to asking price? And I'm saying that because I want to be realistic. I always ask the seller, what is your motivation for selling? How fast do you need to sell it? I'm always unpeeling that onion, talking to them about the various issues of why they're selling in the first place. Because listen, if they're trying to get to a job in New Jersey that starts on Friday, I'm going to have a whole different conversation with them than if, it's like whenever we get around to it. I had a seller on a house that I listed, and sadly it was across the street from me on a property that the seller said, it doesn't matter, whatever, we want this much. And of course, it was more than the value of the property. And so I said, it's not going to sell right away. It's going to take at least 6 months for it to sell. That's okay. We're not in a hurry. Now, folks, you need to be listening to these messages as you're sitting there with these people. And so I literally, the seller calls me the next day. How come you haven't sold my house yet? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. We just had this conversation yesterday that, we were going to, you said you weren't in a hurry. 6 months is fine. Don't care. And they said, yeah, I know, but you could at least show the property. And then the next day, nobody from your office has even shown the property. And so I'm constantly reminding them of that original conversation that we had where I said the property's priced too high. Okay. So, and it was really kind of comical because my house was on a downhill slope. At that time you could put your car in, you turn your car off and put it in neutral and actually coast down. And literally I'd taken the light bulb out of the garage, interior garage door opener so that it wouldn't come on when I hit the clicker that opened the garage door, so I could coast into the garage so that they wouldn't see me come home. Because if they saw me come home, they'd be calling me on my phone right away. This is, by the way, before cell phones. So just be aware, you shouldn't really have to go through all of that. Okay. So pricing strategy. So remember that buyers look in increments of $50,000. All right. And so that's in most cases. When you get into 5 million, 10 million, they're more going to be in the couple hundred or $500,000 price range, but they're going to be looking in certain price ranges. So for you to price a property for $1,001,001, you're going to lose, everybody that was looking only up to $1 million. So I would suggest that they price it up to the price that's at the closest bend on the next pricing level. Okay. So what happens now if you price the property too high? I'm going to tell you, you're going to sit. You price the property too high, you sit. Okay. And I tell this to the seller, and you're going to wait for the market to come to you. If you price the property low, you're going to create your own market. So which would you rather do? You want to price it high and just sit, or do you want to price it low and then get a flurry of offers, or a feeding frenzy by all the buyers that want to get into your property? Okay, so those are honest questions that you have to have with your owner. All right. Okay. That being said, discuss other properties in the marketplace. All right. So let's talk about that. So I always like to bring my CMA in here. Hi, Alice. I like to bring my CMA in here right about this point. And so I always start the conversation off with my active listings. Hi, Alice. How are you? And Alice, just so you know, your camera is on and everybody can see you if that's okay with you. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, I know. We're trying a new format. We were doing webinars before where people weren't able to say anything, but now they're trying it under the meeting format, which I actually kind of like now because I can interact. So please ask questions. So when I go on my listing appointment, I'm gonna bring along my CMA. I'm gonna start off with my active listings, and this is the conversation I actually have with people. So these are your current competition. These are the people that are competing with you for the buyers in the marketplace. Okay. Then I have my pending listings. And again, this is all a script. This is what I do. And so for those of you that actually want the script, I'll send you the PowerPoint, or you can also look up the video if you want to do it that way. But secondly, I look at my pending listings and I say to the seller, this is the price that it took to get an offer. Okay. And then I look at my expired listings. And when I'm looking at my expired listings, this is the price that was too high and did not sell the property. So far, when I'm talking to my seller about pricing, clearly expired, why would you want to be another expired listing? Right now, and I appreciate the fact that in the last 12 years now, the market has been constantly accelerating. But at the same time, it goes to their motivation level. When do they want to get out? When do they want to, close the transaction so they can move on to be with the grandkids, whatever, that kind of thing. So I'm going to have my expired listing. That's the listing that is too high and didn't sell the property. And then finally, I have my sold listing, and that's what the ready, willing, and able buyer was willing to pay. Okay, so when I'm looking at it, my goal is that let me pull up the next screen. I'm going to have all of them there. So my goal when I go on that appointment is I want to get all of mine priced at what the sold price is, right? Because frankly, my competition, I don't care about my competition. I want to be the next sale. So, this is something I tell the seller. If you want to be the next sale in the area, they're going to go after the lowest priced property in that area. And I know, you raised your kids in the house, or you've got travertine floors, you've got all kinds of reasons why your place is worth more. But the likelihood of it is that the buyer is going to buy the lower priced home in the neighborhood. Okay. So pending listing. And I always want to talk to them about the pending, and I tell them, I say, that's the price it took to get the offer. That is not what it's going to close for necessarily. And one of the things we're seeing across the country now, and again, as some of you know, I do talks across the country now. So Mr. Big Important Guy, I guess, I can't get my screen to open up, but anyway. I tell people that there's a lot of seller concessions now. I'm seeing a lot of listings where the seller is giving something to the buyer to keep them in the deal. Okay, so yeah, definitely thumbs up, right? I'm telling you. And again, I'm a practitioner like you, so I see this every day. So again, these are my four. These are the ones I'm going to bring into my listing appointment. My goal is to get them at the sold price. Their goal is to get the expired price. Yeah, but I try to tell them that's counterintuitive. You don't want the expired price because then you're another expired listing. And so, and at that point, if the seller insists on pricing it too high, I will frequently say to the seller, I'd rather be the second agent in. And so a lot of people say to me, they say, what does that mean, the second agent in? Well, see, so if I'm the first agent and you price it too high with me, then 6 months from now, you're unhappy with me and you go list it with someone else who talks you into the price reduction. And it's like, I'm not going to have that conversation. It's like, I want to have this conversation here right now. Let's pretend like the agent that overpriced the property has already left for the day. Let's price it today so that we're going to sell it. Okay. Again, remember, you price it too high, you sit. You price it low, you create your own market. Okay. That's what you want to do. Everybody good? Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and I always like this. This is kind of a nice little touch that I do. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, which column do you want to be in, right? Do you want to be in the column that says, expired, or do you want to be in the column that says sold? And these are very real conversations that I have with people. And again, I slow down when I'm in the listing appointment. I had a listing appointment with Linda, who's my broker. She came on her first listing appointment with me, and the seller was a probate attorney. And of course, I got along great with him, right? And lawyer to lawyer kind of thing. And I'll never forget, Linda was sitting there. It's her very first appointment. Obviously, I've had thousands of these. And so this guy, he takes the listing agreement, and when we get down to the arbitration provision, at that point the arbitration was in the agreement, and he breaks out this green pen and he crosses the line through it and says, "I'm not going to agree to arbitration." And I looked at him and I said, okay. And I pulled out my red pen because I'm teaching in the college. I always had a red pen, right? And so I crossed it off too. We both initialed it. I said, good. This way we agree we're going to sue each other if there's a problem. And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, you're not going to sue me. There ain't no chance you're going to, especially as we go through the transaction, you're going to learn more and more about why I'm probably not a good candidate for a lawsuit. So, but now it's time to close on. And by the way, Linda, she ended up getting really sick after that appointment. I mean, that was stressful for her because, I had told her in class never to change the pre-printed language, right? You never alter the pre-printed language. And here I went ahead and did it. I said, it's lawyer to lawyer. What do I care? He ain't going to sue us. There's just not a chance, right? So it's just one of those funny little stories. So now it's time to close on price. Okay. So you got to know your scripts, and this is important. So remember what our scripts were. The first one was, what you going to charge me to get there? Okay. And so please ask questions. So let's talk about that shit, folks. They're going to ask it. They don't know what else to do. They think that that's what they're supposed to do, is ask you a question. I took two of my college students on a listing appointment with me out in Scripps Ranch. We went around the house. I did the whole thing that I tell the seller, that I tell the agents to do. And that is, I work in a clockwise direction. I have them show me around the house. We go through the whole thing. They're showing me all this stuff that I wasn't going to remember anyway. I was writing everything down as I could on my listing input sheet on my clipboard. And then we get to the very end. Everybody's standing in the kitchen. Nobody's sitting down. I don't know how socialized they were, but anyway, we're standing in the kitchen. And then finally, Mrs. Seller turns to me and she says, well, maybe we should ask you about commissions. See, she didn't know. She said, maybe we should ask you, it's husband and wife, maybe we should ask you about commissions. And so I said, that's where I put my foot down. She goes, you do? And I go, yeah. I said, I refuse to charge you more than I charge anybody else. And they both shook their head like this, and they go, got it. Okay, let's get started. They'd already signed everything. They didn't even sign the listing agreement. I had them sign everything while we're standing there, right? And I just grabbed all my papers and I said, thank you very much. I'll give you a holler. And we walked out, and the two students met me outside, and they said, what just happened in there? And I said, well, they felt like they had to ask a question because they felt like they needed to be involved in the whole process of the listing. And I had pretty much directed traffic from when we first got there, right? I mean, they were telling me things that they knew. I asked a lot of questions, folks. Ask a lot of questions. That is the most important thing that you do. I mean, every time they stop talking, process it for a second, but then ask them another question. I have found in my experience that when people start asking me questions, when I'm on that appointment, they start asking me questions, I don't take it personally because I figure that's just a way for them to stall while they're processing what I just said a minute ago. So I found that that's my experience. They're just really trying to buy time while they're thinking about what I just said. So again, when I go on a listing appointment, I'm very calm. I'm very quiet. I ask questions. I wait for answers. I write everything down that they say. Sometimes I'll make a big stink out of it and I'll go, hey, you know what? What you just said was really, really important. I want to make sure I get that right. And then I'll break out my pen and I'll start writing on the paper, and they'll be looking at me writing it on the paper, and they'll get all impressed with, how important what they have to say is to me. And I think it is. What they have to say is very important. It's the largest investment of a lifetime. And so I want them to know that I respect that about what they're doing. Okay. So they don't know what else to do. All right. So most times it's really just a question. So like sometimes, and I know I annoy Linda to no end, I'll ask a question and she says, God, you ask a lot of questions. And I said, yeah, because I'm just trying to get you to get that shy out of there, right? Start talking to me about what's going on. Okay. But you just got to ask the question. That's all. So sometimes when they are asking a question, they're not really asking, they're not even listening for the result. How much you going to charge me? That's the number 2 prong we're working on right now. So present your value proposition. Okay. So why am I important to you here today? And what is going to distinguish me from the rest of the pack? And don't assume. I mean, there's a lot of things that we assume when we go on a listing appointment. My experience is that if I call them up on the phone and I'm setting the time for the appointment, I ask them how many other people that they're interviewing, and I'm kind of don't want to make a big deal out of it. But if they say 3, I say, okay, can you do me a favor? And they say, what's that? And so I always ask for the favor before I ask the favor. Okay. And so I say, okay, can you make me the first appointment? And why? Because I know I'm going to close them on the appointment. And then when I'm in there and I do close them on the appointment, then they say, that, they're going to list with me. So I say, okay, who are those other 2 agents that you had interviews scheduled with? I'll go ahead and call them and let them know they don't need to come out on the appointment. And then the seller goes, oh God, thank you for doing that. We still feel so bad for them, but obviously you're the one that we want to list the property with. And I say, okay, well, let me take that off your hands. I'm going to go ahead and call the other agents for you. They love that. It's such a simple gesture rather than walking out and saying, figure it out, right? So I don't want to do that. Okay. All right, good. So present your value proposition. What is it about me that makes me special? And as I said, and I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before. Listen, people do business with you because they like you. The eye contact, the handshake, the whatever that initially got 15 seconds to make a good impression. Okay, I don't walk in with my CV 6 pages long and go, look what I did here on page 1, and look at page 2, and look at page 3. That's not how I do it, right? I go in there, I try to make nice. I try to, make good eye contact, express concern about what they're trying to do, things like that. And that's what's going to set me apart from the rest. And you have that same skill. Okay. It's just that I want to be appointment number 1 because I'm going to probably close them for it. Right. But if I can't be number 1, I always want to be number 3. And there's a principle of psychology called the primacy recency effect. And that is that people remember the first and the last things that you tell them. Okay. So primacy recency effect. So they're going to remember the first appointment and they're going to remember the last appointment. They're not likely to remember the one in the middle. So I am not going to be that one in the middle. Does that make sense? It's important. I'm not going to be the middle guy. I'm going to be the on one of the ends. I prefer to be the first one. But let's look at the scenario. What happens if I become the 3rd appointment? And so I say to them on the phone, as we've set up the time for the appointment, they're meeting 2 other people ahead of me. They've already told me they're doing that. And I say, okay, I need you to promise me something. Remember, this is how I like to do this, right? I need you to promise me something. And they say, oh, really? What's that? I say that you will not make a decision on who to list your property with until you've had a chance to hear my speech. You hear what I'm saying? This is so powerful. Why? I just torpedoed the other 2 agents. Okay. I didn't say anything bad about them. I just said, hey, you got to promise me though, not to make a decision until I have a chance to give my little speech. And then when I go there, I do what I do. Right. And so, but I'm not leaving until they sign a listing agreement. Again, unless, we're clearly not going to get along, like they're an axe murderer or something, or, they got something going on that's going to be that listen, if I don't feel like I'm going to be able to help them without having a fight every time I talk to them on the phone, then I'm probably not going to take the listing. I'll have them call number 1 and number 2, but number 3 doesn't want the listing because what, it's it's just not going to be a good fit. By the way, that's a good takedown close. What do we call that? A takedown, where I say, what, a takeaway close. It's a takeaway close, which means, it's okay. I really don't want the listing. I mean, I'd love to help you, but there's some things that you want to have done that just aren't going to happen. So I do want to thank you for your time. And you get up. There's a very, very big real estate agent who takes a lot of listings out. He's getting anywhere from 100 to 125. He says 150. I don't think so, but 100 to 125 listings a year. And his appointments were never more than 15 minutes. Listen, Linda says it takes me 15 minutes to introduce myself. So, so she says, hey, you know what? You need more than 15 minutes. But this guy's thing is all about 15 minutes. And so he comes in with a script, and people have said to him, are you going to keep reading that to us? And he says, yes, because he doesn't know any other way to do it. Now, folks, he's taking 100 to 125 listings a year. So if you think about it, heck, I'm going to start reading a script, right? But people say to him, said, you going to keep reading that? And he goes, yeah, because he doesn't know any other way to do it. He's kind of inflexible about that. But at the end of 15 minutes, he stands up. And then he turns around to leave. And then they say to him, they say, where are you going? And he says, well, you had 15 minutes. I got another appointment. and you know what? Well, here, let's get the paperwork signed. Huh? I can't believe that works, right? So remember what I say, all personalities make money in this business. So question, you have a question? Or you just give me a high
Yeah,
five?
so I mean, he did the 15-minute thing. Is he like the 1% listing agent? I mean, he's just basically reading his script and getting these listings. Is he doing six? Because everybody wants to know how much they're getting charged and what he's gonna get them. So how is he getting 100 to 125 listing?
Yeah, and I have no idea. I suspect that he's not charging. I remember having a conversation with him about that. When we were at the at Prudential, we were both. Even Steve Rogers, who was the general manager, said, you two guys were always like, you were number 49, he was number 50, and then the next time you'd be number 50 and he was number 49, and so it was always a trade-off. But then Steve turns to me, he says, but you have personality, so so the other guy, he just had a different personality than I do. I mean, it was very stoic. It was very much like Lurch, right, from Addams Family. But I clearly am not that guy. And so I have no idea what commissions he charges, other than I remember him doing a presentation showing a listing agreement and how in the listing agreement, by law we can't put in how much we are going to charge for. CAR cannot put in a pre-printed amount for commissions. CAR can't do that because that would be price fixing. That would be
Right.
the impression that it's customary, ordinary, normal. Everybody charges that. Nobody's going to show your property without that. But
Right.
we don't do that. And so, so that's why it's blank. That's why you fill in whatever your broker tells you to do. So here in this case, he would put up there on the board. I'm trying to remember if I can remember it correctly, but he would put a 6, a 7, and an 8. And then he would say to the customer, which one do you want? And of course, then they would circle the 6. So, but there was no 5 or 4 or 3, right? So I thought that was a great close. I mean, whatever the number was, I don't even remember. It might have been 6, 7, and 8. I don't remember, but we have an agent in our brokerage who charges 10. And it's like, people are like, are you kidding? What is he holding him at gunpoint? And that's just his business model. That's just the way he does things. And I'm sure he does things for that are different than others do it. But you may be the only appointment. You got to remember that you might be the only one. And so, go for the gusto. We do a lot of transactions and more coming now that are going to be short sales and things like that. And so we take we're there to help people. I just had this conversation. One of our brokers is a bankruptcy attorney. So, he's clearly an esquire. I'm a JD. That just means, a juvenile delinquent, but he's actually an esquire. And so really a neat man. I just love talking with him. And he goes out and he gets his listings, and they're almost all short sales. So they're almost all going to have issues associated with them. But since I do most everybody's work, he doesn't really care about that. But at the end of the day, he lists the short sales for a different commission split than he lists regular listings for. And so again, I haven't told you a number here on anything. That's how we stay compliant. But it's whatever your broker's required by law to establish a minimum commission. It's going to be in that exhibit A and B that you would have signed when you signed up with your brokerage. Okay, they have to by law establish a minimum commission within your office, not to be discussed outside of your office. Not mine charges this, mine does that. No, we don't have any of those conversations. Whatever your broker tells you, that whatever they establish, then that's what you. It's always a minimum. It's I've never heard of a maximum, but okay.
Yeah, I think I need to go back and look at it because I'm with eXp Realty and they said I can charge whatever I want, even if it's like something like $1.
Yeah, there's no minimum, there's no maximum. In fact,
Right.
MLSs around the country now have adopted zero as a commission split for the seller's agent to put in how much they're going to pay out of their commission, how much they're going to pay the buyer's agent. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
it does make sense. It's
yeah,
because of that lawsuit, right? We don't have to negotiate the commission for the buyer side. We negotiate for ourselves and then we can just put zero there and then they negotiate on their own with the seller or the buyer.
right. So kind of a lot of that's right, but yeah, I think you're referring to the Burnett decision, but
Right.
the Sitzer Burnett decision, aside, in California, the forms that we use to take listings very clearly say, here's how much the total commission is going to be. That's paragraph 3A1, right? And then further down the page on paragraph number 3D, it says, here's how much out of that 3A1 we're going to pay the buyer's agent, right? Okay,
Right.
so, but again, we're not going to establish minimum values or maximum values or anything like that because that would be price fixing, it'd be an
Yeah.
antitrust violation. So the Burnett decision was about the seller's agents not being clear about how much they were going to be charging for the commissions. And so California, I'm, listen, we survived those lawsuits. That decision unfortunately affects us because we're members of NAR, but that jury is still out, so to speak. It's going to be years before the appeals are heard, and I would say continue to do business, getting your buyer representation agreement signed. Make sure that no matter who your client is, they very
Kevin, you're getting cut off. I'm not able to hear you. Kevin, you're muted, so I cannot hear you.
sorry about that. I did all so most of the MLSs across the country lower limit, obviously not negative numbers, but and the whoops question. I got a question and you are muted. Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, good. So anyway, they just a year and a half ago established zero as the number, and so I'm seeing that across the country because you really $1 can't be the minimum, right? It has to be zero. So it just makes sense. So present your value proposition. Remember to distinguish yourself from the rest of the pack. I think you're going to find that when you go on a listing appointment, you're probably going to be the only one there, right? I mean, they're not going to have 5 of you together in the room and have you compete with each other or arm wrestle or something, right? So take solace in the fact that you have their 100% undivided attention. Now's the time to get the agreement, right? And so don't be in a hurry to rush the paperwork out. Part of that is also the timing, and you'll learn that timing as you're going on more and more appointments. Everybody's different. but your goal is to try to figure out when it's okay to broach the subject. So I always start off with the RA form, and I'm going to show you that form in a second. This is how I always do all my listing appointments. Okay, so top 10 things I'm going to do for you, and I always get a kick out of this because I back when I first got started in real estate, I was with a company that I won't tell you their name, but I was with a company and we had this little thing called the top 21 things that I will do for you. So figure out what company that was, right? So what I would do is I would type up my own 21 things. Again, it doesn't have to be 21, you can do 10, right? And then I would go down to the print shop, which was called Alpha Graphics at the time, and I would have them printed on goldenrod paper, which was the color of the company I was with. And I would ask them to make it so it looked like, parchment paper. So it looked like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So when I went in on a listing appointment, this was quite the presentation, right? So I would present them with the top 21 things I'm going to do for you, and I would sign it in front of them, and then I would hand it to them. Now, folks, it was hokey stuff. It was like, I will make sure that the buyer is pre-approved for a loan, stuff that just like the really obvious stuff. If you go into the listing agreement, you'll find that there's a paragraph in there that talks about the broker's obligations and the seller's obligations. All right. And I'm going to be doing podcasts here coming up, breaking down each paragraph of these forms so that they're easy to understand. And then you don't have to watch the entire podcast. You just watch the part that you have question about, like, what does liquidated damages mean? Well, click on the one that says liquidated damages, right? So that's how that was one of my best closing tools. Now we have an equivalent to that today called the RA form, and that's the realtor acknowledgement form. And I'm going to show you that form in just a second. Okay. But the top 10 things I'm going to do for you, and I go in, and if you go into that, I think it's paragraph number 7, and you've got all those things that and I give this as a homework assignment to the attorneys in the law class that I teach. And I tell them to go get that paragraph, and I want them to write it out, and I want bullet points and write it all out in bullet points. Okay. So the way you see it in the agreement, it's word wrap, right? It's like this, it's a wrap around. Okay. But I want it typed, I want it on there so that it's in bullet points and not all confused together. And so when they do that, they say, well, that just sounds like a tedious assignment you're giving us. But when they're done, they say, wow, we had no idea you did all those things. And that's the kind of conversation I want you to have with the seller. And that is, here's the word wrap, here's the non-word wrap version, here they are in the bullet points. These are the things I'm going to do for you. I'm going to tell you to put it on your letterhead, put your logo on it, your picture, your contact information, and then you sign it in front of them and you hand it to them. They don't sign it, but you sign it in front of them and you hand it to them. And so I'm going to tell you that I'm going to show you in a minute. I'll show you the realtor acknowledgement form as one of the first forms I ever sign in front of a client, right? First form I ever sign is realtor acknowledgement form. The first form they ever sign is the agency disclosure. Okay. All right. So take notes from your listing agreement, right? Prepare for the objections. So what happens? I always love this part. So and so will charge me less. So like less commission. And so your response to that is, and they probably should. And they're sitting there looking at you like, where did that come from? Well, they can't compete with me on price, right? Or I'm sorry, they have to compete with me on price because they can't compete with me on service, right? So I'm going to bring you excellent service, and they're going to have to make up for that by cutting the commissions on their end of things, okay? And so I like to do that circle. I draw a circle and I say, here's half of this goes to the seller's agent, here's half of this goes to the buyer's agent, and then I say, so I'm the seller's agent, so half of what I do goes to my broker. I get to keep the other half. So now I'm down to a quarter of the pie, right? And then I say to them, here's a third of that has to go to taxes, right? Assuming you're in the 33% tax bracket. And then here's the other third where I put shoes on my kids' feet, right? And then here's the other third that I spend on marketing. So where can I mean, the IRS is not going to let me cut my taxes. So the only thing that's really left is to cut the marketing. So I can cut the marketing, in which case you're not going to be happy because it's not going to sell the house right away. But there's got to be give and take in all this. So I always do that little diagram. I always get really entertained when I do it because I just know what the reaction is going to be. Some people just say, okay, I get it. We're not going to mess with that. So then again, I charge what I charge, whatever that is. And I've never had anybody at the end of a transaction say you weren't worth it. I've never had that happen. Bring value. When you're working with someone, bring value to that. Okay. All right. So remember the old saying, you get what you, and I always say this to the client, right? I say, you get what you, and I know you already know what's coming, right? So pay for, right? Let them finish pay for. You say, you get what you, and then stop. And then they go, pay for, even if they've got to mutter it, right? Let them complete the saying, because then now they own it. All right. And that's the important part about that, is that when they complete it, then they're going to own it. Okay. And so then now you're not going to get into a fight with them over commissions or anything like that. I find literally the listing appointment, I never get an argument. But I'm going to show you why. I'm going to show you, this is a really cool tool. I'm sensitive to my time. If I could figure out what the time was.
11:35.
Yeah, I know, I'm running out of time. Here's another objection. I hear that the real estate commission is at X, at some figure. Okay. So I've gone on many an appointment, and the seller has said, well, most everybody else charges 5%. And I say, how do you know that? And they say, well, because you're paying 2.5% to the buyer's agent. And I go, what makes you think that? Right. And I always ask them, I say, my response is, how do you know that? Okay. It is a violation of our MLS rules to share agent printouts with non-subscribers. So if somebody is showing the seller a printout that shows the commission that the buyer's agent is getting, they're already breaking the rules. Okay. So I always ask the seller, so if they're going to break the rules now, what are you going to do? When are they going to break the rules with you? And so I don't want to be that guy that if they're breaking the rules, I don't want to say anything bad about the other agent. I never want to do that, but I do always want to say, I always want to leave doubt. Okay, that's all. So nothing replaces boots on the ground. So I hear the commission market. Here's another one. You're only seeing what the seller's agent is paying the buyer's agent. Okay. We just closed a transaction where we know the seller's agent was getting more than we were. So, all the footprints were there, the hardcore approach to everything and all of that. So it just is. So, but it's rarely half. We've got a broker in our office who takes his listings at 10, and he's not splitting it. I assure you of that, right? Okay. So there is no requirement that seller's agents split the commission equally with the buyer's agent. There's no such rule. All right. So-and-so has a lot of listings. Okay. Your response to that, what happens when the seller says, well, this other guy has all these listings, and your response is, I promised you personal service. Would you rather work with a real estate professional that you hired, or maybe get calls on Monday from an assistant making excuses for why your house hasn't sold over the weekend? Okay, because that's what usually happens. They got 75 listings. Do you think that agent's going to be calling all their sellers? So-and-so has a lot of listings. That's going to work against them. And I tell that to the seller. I say, well, with me, you get me. You're my only game in town. I'm representing you. Don't have any other listings, whatever. But you're going to get me, and you can get a hold of me anytime. You're not going to go to voicemail. I mean, I'm famous for answering my phone. People call me. Look at that. I got messages already. People call me all the time. It's like, I'm famous. I answer my phone. I mean, I'm not answering it right now, obviously, because I'm on a webinar, but when or a meeting, this is actually a meeting. It's different than the webinars that we were doing. So they decided to try a new format. But just remember that, are you going to be, wait, you want to hear from the assistant who really doesn't know anything about real estate? Why isn't your agent calling you? Because they have 75 listings. Okay. So that works against them. All right. Okay. Know your scripts. When we're dealing with a seller, we refer to the structure as a house. You never call the seller's house a home, right? When we're working with because we want to desensitize them from the sale. All right. In other words, we want them to sell the house, but if we start reminding them and reinforcing that it's their home, they may talk themselves out of selling it. And we don't necessarily want that. We want to encourage what their original goal was to be. When we're working with the buyer, we're looking for a home. Okay. So with a seller, it's a house. With the buyer, it's a home. All right. Because we're trying to sensitize them for the purchase. what are the most important things, and I do this in quotes, that you are looking for in a real estate professional? Were you aware that not all real estate agents are realtors? This is a huge surprise to people, okay? I use this in every single listing appointment I've got, all right? Let's look at a standard form that realtors use. All right. And I always say that to explain the differences between a realtor and a licensee. And that's going to be CAR form RA. And that's the realtor acknowledgement form. Okay. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull that up. It's one of my favorite forms. Yeah, there we go. So here's what page 1 looks like. And by the way, page 1 is going to go away on next week on the 18th, 19th when we release the new forms. In fact, this afternoon I'm doing the new forms. So anyway, so it's against the law for someone to call themselves a realtor when in fact they're not. Really, what the law says that it's against the law to claim that you're a member of a trade organization when you aren't. So if you aren't a member of NAR, you cannot call yourself a realtor. And so the client always says to me, well, I thought you were all alike, right? They always say that. And I go, well, no, we're not all alike. And then I get to page 2 of this document. Again, they've summarized it down to 1 page now on the new form. But when we get down to page 2, this explains all the stuff I just told you about. Now, here's the thing. With the seller, I've created doubt in their mind. What about those other 2 people that were here? We don't remember asking them if they were realtors or not. And so then I go ahead and the only person that signs that is me, and I sign it at the bottom and I hand it to them right there on the appointment, right? Okay. And why? Because I want to make, I'm on a show, right? I'm creating a show for them. I want them to know that there is a difference between the 2. Okay. So that RA form is like the equivalent of my form that I had before, the 21 things I'll do for you. Okay. But again, I think you should take that seller listing agreement and take out those words in the paragraph and create, bullet points and put that on paper with your letterhead and everything and sign that in front of them, just like you sign this in front of them and you hand them a copy. Okay, so you can see that it is a crime to call yourself a realtor when you are not. All right. And then they say, what? Wait a minute, we've never seen that form before. And so then I say, they say, no one has ever shown it to me. And I say, I know not everyone wants you to know that there is a difference. And so I didn't say that those other people are bad people. I didn't say that they're not, good agents. I never have that conversation ever. I just said, not everybody necessarily wants you to know there's a difference between a realtor and a licensee. And so just so you know, there are roughly 437,000 realtors, licensees in the state of California. Less than half of them, roughly 185,000 of them, are actually realtor members. Okay, so you're a member of a company that is a realtor member, right? I mean, they because they are a realtor member, you must also be a realtor member. All right. So, and that's the only way you're going to be able to call yourself a realtor. And so, but not everybody does that. Other people, do different things and they just do it differently, but they cannot call themselves a realtor. It's not the same thing as clinics and tissue, right? Okay. All right. So that between having a license and abiding by a written code of ethics. And so I'm a certified DRE instructor on ethics. You don't need to be that. You just need to know that you do subscribe to a written code of ethics and they hold you accountable to the principles in that. So just so you know about that, sign it in front of them and give them a copy. That's important. You want to sign it in front of them and then give them a copy. Only you sign it. They don't. See, look, no blood. I always do that. I hold my hand up and I go, look at that, no blood. We're here to sign things today, right? And nobody gets hurt. Okay. And I always tell them that. All right. So the next form, of course, is going to be my agency disclosure form. I won't have time to actually go through all the forms we're going to be looking at. But let me see if I can pull that up. I got all kinds of really good stuff in here for you. I'll send you all this. I mean, I found some really great stuff. So a lot of the stuff, you missed the part, a lot of the stuff is in your zip form program on the right-hand side where it says all forms. If you click on that drop down, there's a whole library on open house forms and things like that. So I recommend that you go in there and you look at that. So here's my agency disclosure. So very simply, it's a disclosure of the concept of agency. So the law says you must disclose the concept of agency prior to committing conduct that constitutes agency. So this is something you're going to do early in the transaction. And so this talks about what the seller's agent does, what the buyer's agent does, what agents representing both the seller and the buyer do, and it doesn't necessarily mean I get paid twice as much. It just means that you know, this is what dual agency looks like. And then finally, the seller and the buyer's responsibilities. And we changed the civil code. That's California Civil Code 2079. So we actually literally went in and changed the civil code so that people would understand the real terms. So it used to be the listing agent and the selling agent. Well, nobody knew who the selling agent was. They thought that was the listing agent. So we changed the language. We had it written in plain English. So that's what the, oh shoot, nice, look at that. I pulled it up. I didn't show you the form. Here's the form. I have another screen over there so I can see what you're looking at. There we go. The disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. Okay. And so again, I'm not gonna have time to show you all the forms, but that's a big one. And I always say, this is a quote, California law requires, and you can say Civil Code 2079, that I disclose the concept of agency before we do anything else. And why? Because I'm going to sign it and they're going to sign it. So when you look at the form itself, you see down at the bottom of page 1 that they're going to sign it. And your job is to make that disclosure. And when they say, oh, I don't want to sign anything, we haven't agreed we're going to list with you, that's a barometer for you to tell whether or not you built up rapport with them or not, sufficient to move forward in the game to get the rest of the important stuff signed. This is very important. But if they're not going to sign this, you really can't go forward. And I kind of look at it that way. I say, hey, you know what? If I can't even get past the disclosure, it says right up here at the top of the form, disclosure. It doesn't say contract, doesn't say agreement, doesn't say binding on the parties. It just says I have to by law disclose what agency could look like. And why is that? Because right now when I'm sitting in front of the seller, I'm in single agency. But if the buyer comes in from underneath your brokerage, right, then that is going to create dual agency, and that's the part the law wants to protect the consumer from. And I say that to the seller, right? So I have to disclose to you when the buyer comes in, whether or not we're still in single agency or whether or not we're in dual agency. I do a lot of trial work on this. You don't have to know what I know. I told Linda that this morning. I don't expect anybody to know what I know. Just understand that you must disclose the concept before you do anything else. And if you can't get them to sign this, then you still got a ways to go. You need to get this done before you do anything else. Okay. All right. So that being said, pull up my PowerPoint again. So this is not a contract. This is merely a disclosure. That's all it is. I find in my experience that once they sign it, they'll sign anything because they've resolved themselves to the fact that they're here to sign things. They've got to know that. And I always say, we're going to do a lot of those today. Okay. That's what we're here for. Okay. Do your warnings. And I say that because you have a lot of warnings. You got the cyber crimes advisory. You've got the wire fraud advisory. You've got the local area disclosures. You got the statewide buyer and seller advisory. The market conditions. We have a lot of advisories and disclosures that we give. An advisory is something that we give them to tell so that we can prove that we gave it to them. A disclosure is something we need to have evidence that we gave it, so we have to have them sign things. Water conserving plumbing fixtures, environmental hazards, fair housing discrimination. Be prepared. Okay. So have all that. I present everything one at a time. And here's why. I remember I had a business partner for 15 years and she made the comment. She said, people will sign anything to get rid of you. And I go, really? And she says, yeah. She says, you just go on and on and on. I say, I know. If I see that I'm putting them to sleep, I figure that I'm lulling them into submission, right? They're going to sign anything I put in front of them. Okay. But present them. I present them one at a time. I go through them with people. Your appointment cannot be 15 minutes. Not like that one guy that had 15-minute appointments. You just can't do it. I mean, it's just not possible. So, and by the way, when they walk out with only the listing agreement. They don't have all the rest of the stuff. They tell the client, I'll have my TC send it to you. And then of course the client's completely clueless as to how to fill it out. And I've had some real bad lawsuits where the agent said, well, I told them that if they had any questions, they could call me. And it's like, no, your job is to advise and counsel. So, your job is to actually read the form at some point in your career and then go over it with the client. That's what you do. Okay. So then you do your disclosures. You did all your advisories. Now you do your disclosures. I want to start with my statutory disclosure versus my contractual disclosure. My statutory disclosures are going to be my TDS. I always want to have that signed at the time of the listing. My natural hazard disclosure, right? My fire hardening and defensible space. And by the way, that's going to change. I think effective the first of the year, we've created a law that requires the natural hazard companies to figure that out and put it in the form. So your Mello-Roos, your methamphetamine contamination, those are your statutory disclosures. So I took a listing up in Lake Forest. If I've told you the story before, stop me. But took a listing up in Lake Forest. We were there 3.5 hours. The seller signed everything. Now they'd been a student of mine in the college 15 years earlier, so they said, you know we need to have you to protect us. But they sat down and we signed every single disclosure. They filled them all out. They were completed everything. The mom had died in the property the year before. They disclosed the death. There were unpermitted additions. They disclosed those. Everything. 3.5 hours, and we got through everything. I had all of the disclosures. Buyer writes an offer, sends it in. We send the counter offer over with all of the disclosures. The buyer does not have a right to rescind the contract based on the items that we disclosed. So we disclose the death. They can't come back later on and say you were canceling because of the death on the property. Well, we told you that before you signed the contract. So there's no canceling the contract at that point. Rescission is a very powerful word at law. I don't think I'm going to be doing another talk on that for SDAR, but I did one last week. So my statutory disclosures, I want to get those out of the way because those are the only things that contain rescission rights. Then I get into my contractual disclosures, and those contain cancellation rights. And so wow. So my seller property questionnaire, that's not statutory, it's contractual. Okay. Now, if by the way the seller is exempt from disclosure, then the seller property questionnaire has that in the first paragraph on page 1 that there is no other form for it. The California legislative body created the TDS, but it wasn't finished. They never finished it. So it's 3 pages, but it never covered like Civil Code 1710, death on the property, things like that. So that's why we have the SPQ. The seller's affidavit of non-void status. Again, not a statutory requirement, but if you don't have that signed by everybody, the buyer could end up having to pay the taxes on the sale. So we want to make sure we get that done. Seller listing information checklist, that's an SDAR form. It's a good form. And then the SPQA is a good form. That's the San Diego form as well. And so the last thing that I'm going to have them sign is going to be the listing agreement. Of course, that's what they wanted to talk about the whole time, right? So when I get there, they want to talk about the listing agreement. I go, oh, we're going to get to that. Don't worry. It's always at the bottom of the stack. Why? Because it's got everything in it that they want to talk about, right? They want to talk about how much you're going to get me, and they want to talk about how much you're going to charge me to get there. And those are both on page 1. Okay. All right. So it's the last form that the client will sign. If you rush in and have them sign this one first, then you have not had a chance to prove to them your value by explaining the disclosures and the warnings and all those other things to them. Okay. And a lot of that stuff, you can do it on the fly. I mean, you don't have to don't memorize any of this stuff, but just read through it, get an idea what it says. You'll get like me, where I was always better reading things upside down than I was pricing discussions. Already done. We already finished that, right? You may talk to them about a 30, 60, 90-day close. I mean, I used to use that frequently with my clients. I would say, how long, how much time do we have to sell the
Kevin, you need to unmute yourself because somehow you got muted again.
It keeps doing that. I apologize for that, Alice. Thank you for letting me know. I talked for half an hour before somebody finally said, "Hey, you know what? You're muted." And I'm like, I've been talking to myself the whole time. So anyway, my 10-day, 30-day, 60-day, all those things have different results. And obviously, the longer the period of time that they're not in a hurry to do, the higher the price they want for the property. Your goal is to sell the property. And so your goal is to get it priced reasonably to sell it in a reasonable amount of time. Okay. So this is why I said I want to be the second agent in, because they're the ones that always get the price reduction. So, it's, I've done this for way too long to, I've got other things to do. It's like I told Linda the other day, I said, I got other stuff to do. I mean, I don't need to be doing this. So, okay. So that being said, commission discussion's already done. You've already talked about, what it is that you're going to charge, what your values are for what you provide. Sell your services, not your price. This is where you should be discussing time. So this is at the very end of the listing appointment. How quickly do you need to sell? Okay, so what is your main motivation for selling now? A lot of times they'll say, well, we want to be near the grandkids, in Minnesota. Listen, nobody moves to Minnesota. Okay, they only move there because there's something in Minnesota for them, and it's not coal mining, right? It's like my grandkids are in Minnesota, the kids are there, so we want to be near the kids. And so find out what it is that motivates them to sell the property, and then you want to keep pinching at that all along. Okay. I always work the referral, but we'll talk about that. So what attracted you to purchase this house in the first place? So, and I just had this conversation with one of our attorneys who took a listing, and I said, maybe the guy's got pictures of the house. It's up in Manteca. Maybe he's got pictures that when he bought the house that enticed him to buy the house. Let's see if he can give us those pictures and we can put them in the MLS. Remember, don't use other real estate agents' pictures, because that's going to be a violation of our terms. But the seller can give you pictures of what they think are nice things about the house. You're working on your marketing plan here. That's what's important to remember. Do you have any favorite pictures, any favorite photos? Can you give me a list of upgrades that you have done to the house? That's going to be really important. And I say that because remember, when you've got your remarks section, you're trying to sell the sizzle, right? You're trying to sell the property. So I need to know all the really cool bullet points about this property so that I can sell it, right? And so if they can give you that list, and 90% of the time they've got the list. And if you don't ask for it, you're trying to make this stuff up on your own. Get them to give you their list. You type their list up, copy, paste it into the MLS, and I think you're off to the races. Okay, so give me a list of upgrades. Plus, it makes it easier for me to recompute the value of the property in RPR, because RPR has a whole window in there about improvements. When did you do them? How much did you spend on it? And then it does the algorithms to determine how much the property is actually worth with those improvements. And so who did the improvements, and then do you have receipts? All right. So work the referral. Where are you moving to? I had an agent I had an office in Tucson, Arizona. And I had an agent that never sold a house. All she did was referrals. And I talked about this the other day. I think was it in Master My Farm? But all she ever did, she just called the for sale by owners in the newspaper, and she would just say, I don't want your listing. Where are you moving to? I'm not soliciting the listing, so technically speaking, not a violation of do not call. But where are you moving to? Have you thought about having somebody send you, copies of, listings, properties that are available in that area? And so get their permission, then make the connection, have them talking to each other. And now you got a referral fee. Last referral fee check I cut was $5,500. So, that wasn't, this gal was in 1982. So that I assure you the check wasn't that high. It was probably $550, right? But that was that was in Tucson, Arizona. So a little bit different. So where are you moving to? Because I don't want to end the conversation on, oh, you signed a listing agreement. Let me grab that and run out the front door as fast as I can before you tackle me. You don't want that, right? You want to like pretend like you're still in this, have the conversation. So where are you going to go to, right? I may know someone there who can help. All right. So unpeel the onion. That's your job. Ask a lot of questions. None of my listing appointments are 15 minutes. They can't be. Okay. Ask a lot of questions. So remember, talk less, listen more. Very important. Talk less, listen more. You know, again, as I said earlier in the presentation, I'm not sure if everybody was there to hear it, but when I go on a listing appointment, you know, I'm a different guy, right? When I'm doing a lecture, you're getting, you know, diarrhea of the mouth. It's just go on and on and on and on, right? But when I go on a listing appointment, I'm zip the lip. I ask a question, I stop, I wait for them to think about it, I wait for them to answer it, and then when I know that for sure they finish their answer, I go on to the next question. So I'm very, very detailed about it. Chuck Buss, who's an agent with a company in Carmel Valley, said, you know, you do your business with a laser, not a chandelier. Okay. All right. Write everything down. Remember, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I've stopped them in the middle of the conversation and said, you know what, that's a really important point you just made. Hang on a second. I need to write that down, make sure I've got that. It's very important. Okay. Make them feel good about themselves. And as I said in the beginning of this presentation, do it on your clipboard. The one you bought at Costco, $6 for 5 of them, right? And have your listing input sheet on there as well. Okay, so yes, in front of them, of course. Brag about your brand. You know, whatever company you're with, brag about it. There's you sign on for a reason. You know, and hopefully it's not just commission splits. Hopefully you're on with a company because of the support that you get. That'd be my goal, right? Be proud of where you are. Okay, coordinate your strategy. So don't be a secret agent. I always love saying that. So many people that I know are secret agents. Nobody knows what they do for a living. They're sitting down at the coffee shop all day. Listen, I like going to the coffee shop, you know, but I don't drink coffee, right? So I drink tea. So I'll sit down at the coffee shop drinking iced tea all day long for $3.95, which I think is criminal. But for $3.95, I can rent an office space right there in the middle of this coffee shop, and I can hold court. And people come in, and they see me, and they come up and, hey, how you doing? You know, and I got my logo going on, right? And you can't miss, you know, what do you do for a living? Well, it says real estate right there, right? And so, but people will come up and they'll ask me questions. And I think I said this in the other class the other day that even Linda, I got her little laptop cover that said, ask me a real estate question. And 6 months later, she's got a new laptop. And I go, what happened to the old laptop? She says, you put that ridiculous cover on there, and people kept interrupting my work. And I said, well, your work is talking to people. And she goes, no, I was doing paperwork. Well, there's no money in paperwork. You pay somebody else to do your paperwork, right? There's no money in that. You need to be talking to people. So yeah, I set you up so that they're going to come up and ask you questions about real estate. So what are they going to say? How's the market? So listen, why don't you think now about all the responses that you're going to generate for people that ask you how the market is? They're going to ask you the question. Okay, we're not even on the appointment. We're sitting in the middle of the coffee shop, and they come up and they go, hey, you know, you're in real estate. How's the market? You know, you got to have an answer ready. And don't say it's crazy, it's out of control, I can't believe it. You know, you say things like, you know, I'm finding great deals for my buyers and for my sellers. And so, you know, here, it's an opportunity. You know, what are you looking for? Remember, I turned it into a question again. I want to keep asking questions. Okay. All right. So don't be a secret agent. I had a guy that was, God, he was down at the coffee shop every day in La Jolla. It's called, what is it called? The Cottage. He'd go down there every single day. No badge, no, you know, nothing that indicated he was a real estate agent. And I saw so many opportunities for him to make money, but he just wouldn't wear a badge. So, okay, don't wear a badge, but whatever. But do people know what you do for a living? I had a young guy who was so shy, I threatened him with putting balloons on the back of his chair. And he said, I don't want you doing that. I go, okay, well, then you need to start talking to people, right? Okay. All right. So real estate is a full contact sport, clearly, right? Questions, any questions that you have for me? This is a good time. Oh gosh, I'm late. I'm sorry. Questions, anybody?
I don't have any questions, Kevin, but you said you'll be emailing all the forms that you introduced during this webinar out?
Yeah, I'll send
Yeah.
everything to you. You want
Okay.
me to? I'll send it all to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you at 2 o'clock.
Ah, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Have a great day. Talk to you
You
later.
too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I'm going to just let all that stuff go. Okay. All right. Thank you, Alice. Take care now.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.